I'll open the meeting and then we'll let people join on here. Make sure we're all set. So I will call to order committee the whole meeting 238 for Tuesday, February 7th. In honor of the Liwa Tool, the Village of Pemberton acknowledges that we are meeting within the unceded territory of the Liwa Nation. Those members of the public in attendance, please note that this meeting is a live webinar and is being recorded. A recording of the meeting will be available on the village's website following the meeting. Couple minutes to.
We may as well keep going. We don't have a whole lot of people coming in, do we? No, so.
Okay, I will look for a motion to approve the agenda. Councillor Helmer, second by Councillor Craddock, opposed, motion carries. Adoption of minutes from 3.1 or from committee of the whole 236 from January 24th, moved by Councillor Helmer, second by Councillor Ramsden. Go ahead.
Through administration, just looking over the report, the asset management review. They had,
That's the 31st.
Yeah, that's in the next set.
Next step, sorry.
We're just around the 24th. There's 2 sets of minutes. Hold that thought for 10 seconds.
I'll try my best.
Seconder to approve the minutes is from January 24th. Councillor Ramsden, any opposed, motion carries. Minutes from January 31st. That's correct. I don't know.
I forgot.
Yeah.
Just wondering, on the report, the asset management review, it had transportation down. Did transportation include our road network and airport?
It should include any roads that belong to the village. I'm not sure about the airport, honestly, but yeah.
Because I was just going through it again, we didn't have the report in advance, and that's a question I didn't get a chance to answer, but I'd like to find out if, because obviously the airport and the local roads are a big cost if we have to do them, and it may change the numbers, so.
Yeah, now in terms of the entire scope of the project, airport assets would be embedded in there with all of the other assets that we have, but I will see where exactly that sits.
Much appreciated. Thanks very much.
With that, I'd like to move adoption of minutes. Councillor Craddock, second by Councillor Ramsden. Any discussion? Any opposed? Motion carried. Takes us to 4.1. We're on delegations, and this is with regards to the Nature Pay Park Playscape structure relocation. We have some guests today. I'm actually like to join us.
I will introduce and then allow them to welcome themselves up to the podium. Thank you very much, Mayor and Council, for having us this afternoon. Just a little background on this one. At council meeting number 1571 on Tuesday, November 22nd, there was a location analysis presented of where we could relocate the Nature Playscape to. That's an Appendix A in your package. And then at that time, a council moved that staff be directed to engage landscaping consultants. So at that point, we moved into regular council meeting number 1573, held on December 23rd, where it was presented that we would like to engage Tom Barrett Limited Landscaping Association. Architects, sorry. And I would like to introduce Alex Van Ziel and Tom Barrett, who will be presenting the extension of the options that you asked to be redesigned, relocate, or expanded upon, I think is the right word. Alex? Hi, everyone. You're there? Making lots of noise.
Nice to meet you all. And my first committee of the whole meeting. Members. That's really exciting. Yeah.
Exciting.
It is. So thanks for the intro, Christine. I guess we'll we're on screen sharing. We're good to go.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so we started working on this in September, and we provided a design with a rationale, and then we were asked to, revisit it and look at our options and see, what are the pros and cons of different places that it could go. So I'll just give a short outline. I'll try to keep it quick. Flag me if I'm too slow. Introduce, so Christine mentioned the analysis, and then based on that, we came up with some guiding principles. So no matter where it goes, there were a few items that we thought this is important to consider. And then we'll show you those options. And then what we did for this was did some 3D models so that we can actually visualize it, because it's pretty difficult to tell in plan, you know, what something's actually going to feel like. And then lastly, what I included in the rationale was the things that that we should consider when moving, and then our recommendation. Yeah, so here we are, the playground that we're moving. And just a couple of views to refresh, because it's all covered in mucky snow right now. And then that sketch that we did that just, you know, looks at the site as a whole, because we're not just moving a playground here. We're considering what the residents and visitors of Pemberton are going to be using for a long time. And so it's kind of a part of a little park that you've got here, and one that's very well used and well loved. So that kind of brings us to some of the principles that we identified with both options. The first being that we'd actually like to use moving the playground as an opportunity to create an outdoor room out of the Pemberton, out of that green space out of the park there. And what do we mean by an outdoor room? So when you have buildings situated in space and they they can either create almost an undefined space in between them, or the structures around them can create a space that feels enclosed. And those typically tend to be our most successful public spaces. So it's kind of about how can we make edges around our open space so that they're well used. And so that was then with the community center is you can see the community center on the left there on the west side, and then those daycares and the residences. Then we've got the Pemberton Portage Road and the parking lot on the south and southeast corner. And that's kind of where we don't have that edge. And so thinking about how can we create that? And so something there, whether it's fencing or planting or the structure to enclose it, to make it more more inviting. And then the second principle was let's screen whatever use we have from those residences, so that the residences there don't feel like they've got a playground in their backyard, and that you don't feel like you're playing in someone's backyard. So however you achieve that, and then orient it towards the community center so that it feels like there's a center and that they are all part of the same program. And then lastly, I don't think I need to explain that you get quite hot summers here. So thinking about shade is always critical in whatever approach we take. So that leads us to the two options. The first one being and you saw this on the plan, narrower layout along the east side of the Great Lawn. And the second option being in the pocket park next to the spray park. And so I'll show you some of those views so that you can start to imagine what those might look like. So this is then modeled. Oh, wow, that's a nice green on the screen. This is, that's neon. You know what, Pemberton's a bright place. So I think we can all orient ourselves. You see the community center, and was actually so helpful for me to do this as well. So I appreciated the opportunity. And this would be then considering where we might put it, the first option and then the second option. And so this is then how we've identified it would look with the first option with shade and screening along that residence.
All it does.
And as you can see, we're not just thinking about the playground in isolation, we're kind of thinking about the planting and how that might work together. So that's then the first one. And then the second option from this perspective could look could look like this, also with trees positioned there for shade and so that the residences have a bit of screening. And so looking at it from this perspective, there's our first option and the second one. And then now if we go on the ground, this is the first option here. It's actually just so much fun to do. You feel like you're in Sims, you know? Making little people move around and yeah.
It's too bad you don't enjoy your work.
It's really hard for me. And then this is our second option. Yeah. And then I thought it was also important to show a few views from the community center. What would that look like? Because they're both on the far side. And so this is then the first option and the second option there. And so that kind of takes us to, you know, what are the pros and cons of each and how do we think that they did? So honestly, they're both viable options. We can make them both work. It's a flat site as well, so it's pretty limited grading for either one. So yeah, cost and viability, I think they're, you know, we can consider them equal. In terms of play opportunities, they're both playgrounds. Kids are going to use them. They're going to love them. I think that having it along the Great Lawn gives them a little bit more space to move. So there's just a bit more wiggle room there. And then I think to sum up what the main difference between the first and the second is that the in that pocket park there, it's just a bit crammed. And so there's going to be a lot of kids playing pretty close to each other. Whereas by positioning it along the Great Lawn, we are just giving everybody a bit more space. And so those radius residences there, that interface, it's quite close for them too. And in terms of accessibility, you know, it's just about providing those paths and about regarding safety as well. I think that as long as we consider screening and edges, then they can both be considered equally safe. I think it was a good exercise to reconfigure that first option and make it narrower so that we don't impede on the Great Lawn too much, because we definitely understand that that's an important gathering space for the village and to make sure that there's enough room. So ultimately, I think that based on our investigation, we consider the fact that Pemberton is growing and that there's so many people using this space and what's around it. We are in favor of the first option, but as we said, we can make either of them are possibilities. Yeah. So that's that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're gonna open it up for questions, comments later, questions to start.
Stop share.
One. Got it?
You show a line of trees along between the parking lot and your first option one
Yes.
as a screening.
Yes.
So what does that entail? About 10 feet of the space to put trees in to allow?
Right. I mean, at minimum, probably 6 feet. And then that is actually, it's nice that you bring that up, because some form of screening, I've shown it as, you know, quite an elaborate hedge. It can also be achieved with something thinner, like a fence with a hedge along it. But yes, I would say probably about, 6 to 10 feet seems reasonable.
I see an option two, because there's already screening there to a certain extent. You wouldn't use up that space.
Pardon me?
We wouldn't use up that space in option two. There's a screening already in place. There's cedar.
There is in option two along the houses, you mean? Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to figure it out, because if we take 6 to 10 feet out and then we put the play park in, it seems to use up more and more of the Great Lawn, and has been one of my concerns.
Yeah,
And how much space we're utilizing, and then the way it's shaped. The piece on what I would call the southwest portion. There's a bit of a chunk of green space now that's just. There, it's not really attached anymore to the green lawn, you gotta look over the plate. We have a big turnout of people, so those are two things I noticed that I had a little problem with.
yeah, so where we're putting the one thing about the edge of the Great Lawn that you're referring to, where I've shown that screen, is that it slopes downwards. And so immediately when you have kind of an area that then does slope down, that zone doesn't really get used. And so to use that as a way to create an edge actually will, I think, make all of the lawn next to it in a way more usable. So the idea would be that you would use that zone that's slightly sloped and hopefully not impede too much into the flat portion. Yeah. And then your concern with having a large number of people in the Great Lawn, I'd heard that, yeah, you have a Canada Day gathering there and that lots of people show up and you have tents. And so I was looking at pictures and we often think that we need more space than we do. And so I think that having actually some restriction there will help to organize whatever use happens on the Great Lawn and make it feel busier. And so having people a bit crowded for those events is actually a really good thing. And so I kind of thought it would almost be a win for it, because if there are lots of people, your kids can be playing right there. And you can be hanging out on the lawn, visiting. And so that was kind of my take on it, but I very much, I hear where you're coming from in terms of those edges.
Thank you.
Any questions? Yes?
Yes, thank you. The visuals are great. It helps a lot, especially with all the snow out there. One thing I do know is that I pay a lot more attention to snow now that I'm on council, and there's a huge amount of snow and it hasn't been a big snow year. It's right sort of on that edge of option one. It's where the snow from the parking lot is getting piled up. So that's just something, and it hasn't been a big snow year this year. So I'm just curious, in like last year, how big that pile would have been on top of the structure. And the other thing too is that we mentioned just multi-generational, but I'm trying to visualize, it's becoming more of like a playground. And if the structure is moved to option one, and I'm just trying to visualize, with the multimodal parking and people getting off tourists or whatever, and they walk over there, if they're just people without kids, if there's going to be picnic tables, and like, are we creating this great lawn to be like a park now and not a great lawn? Because it's kind of what's happening, I feel, if we move over to option one. It's going to be kids here, kids, which is great, kids there, kids kind of everywhere, which is wonderful and lovely, but those quiet spaces for older people who want to just sit and read, are those options being taken away?
I don't know that those options exist currently.
Well, they do, because I sat at a picnic table with Councillor Helmer in the summer, and it was super quiet, and there weren't kids running around everywhere. And I've got kids. I love kids. I don't have a problem with kids. Right. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's becoming a very large playground, that's what it is. If that's what we want it to be, which is great. I don't think there is going to be a lot of room. If we're thinking of the town growing to over 5,000 people, and I appreciate the congestion makes things feel nice sometimes when we're all gathered together, but it's not actually a very big space, what's left there.
Yeah, I have comments, but I'll save them. If there's still questions, do you have any, and you want to add to that? Okay, go ahead.
So speaking of population growth, do you have any idea with it, with the space either in, option one or option two with kind of rough square footage. How many, like, if you were gonna have a bunch of people on that lawn, kind of what the capacity is in a sense, and I have no idea if those numbers exist.
You know, I was actually trying to find them, and it's very difficult.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's a good question. And I think I was also kind of looking around Pemberton for, okay, where are all of the big lawns for when your events get really big? And so, and you have your schools, you know, across the street. And so there are a few other lawns. And then when there was the festival, of course, there's a way to find really big spaces. And so, but it's good question.
I wonder, do you mind pulling up your slide that showed the little pink circles attached to each option, please?
Yes.
And overall, I agree. I think your presentation was fantastic.
Oh,
and,
good.
and colorful.
Yeah. There we go. Oh, I see.
I mean, I can see it, but yeah, there's mine.
I'm a Mac girl, you see.
Oh, I see that. Yeah. Just some quick navigating. I think my question is really around safety. I think, that's a big concern, and having parking so close to option one, I think we really need to understand what that means. And the potential ramification of that. The other key consideration, and I appreciate where your considerations came from. I think they are very pragmatic and they make perfect sense. I think for us as a council, the other important consideration for us is community input. And, that what we get as feedback around the Great Lawn. So I think that's sort of what we're getting at when we're having this conversation. It's not reflected on that. So I just wanted to mention it. I realize we're not in the comment section, but more that I think when we're having the discussion, so much of, how we're unpacking these pieces is really from the feedback we get from the community. So I would add that there for our conversation, but I was really curious about the safety piece and, where you came from in terms of ranking them and how you, I would have identified option one as a least safe option because it's so close to the parking, but I think I might be misinterpreting how you identified that.
Yeah,
I think that's what she has said. So the differentiation.
Oh, yeah, okay. That makes
So
sense.
option one, she has identified as not
Right,
as safe as option two.
okay, yeah, that makes sense.
I think for, and then of course, Hush Road.
Yes. Yeah, very close to Portage.
yeah. No, absolutely. Safety is a key consideration. And I think in that option, it will be really determined by how you treat what's around it.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we can't just put the playground there. I think that wouldn't work. It kind of has to be considered with those factors as well.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
and that's.
Yep, go ahead.
And this is maybe a question more for the village, just in terms of the large green lawns and being able to host events. We have the ability to, I would imagine that it would be easier for us to host events on the lawn next to the community center rather than schools. I don't even know if it would be an option for us to host large public events on the school's
It's
fields.
definitely more complicated. You have liability and insurance and all those things you have to work through for sure. And it's our Great Lawn and it's center, community. So I think in general, we agree that is our meeting spot for the community. I think what's been pointed out is that if we keep referring one day a year, Canada Day. What are we going to do about Canada Day? I think that what was pointed out is that if other events come up over the years, there are other green spaces to look at for other events that we're not even imagining right now. I think is part of the comment. But I would agree that the Great Lawn is our gathering spot.
One thing that we haven't brought up here, but we discussed. That long hard edge of the patio against the community center. Seems to me one of the more desolate, empty, unused spaces I've seen relative to what could be done to it. So if you soften and scallop and decrease the edge of that tape, doesn't do much. It seems to, this response by an architect not knowing what to respond to at the time. Then you've increased your break lawn, made a different edge, and you could do things that make it a peaceful place to sit and such, and overlook the kids at a bit of a distance. And I kind of think that great lawn, right now, when we go by and look at it, it seems like a wide expanse that's very rarely being used. I mean, in a community, when you have a lawn like that that's being mowed and maintained, you should make it being used and realize that the size of that is actually fairly big for general use and kicking the ball around or throwing a ball or a frisbee. I think you're losing that opportunity. You're actually enhancing it because you're looking at it's a couple of things to consider. And I think one of the worst things about option 2 is once you've done that, that's it. You don't have that kind of flexibility. And I think one of the things about the graphic criticism, but is that playground is set within a set boundary, and then there's the sawdust material or something. Whereas if the playground is more so they're flowing in and out of the lawn or onto the playground, there's no real hard definition between the two activities. Or the sitting around a picnic table. It shouldn't be all sort of one thing. I think it'd be a very rare day that it's not peaceful to sit out there.
I had no views.
You gotta get.
Joy to see them right there, you know.
Question?
I'm just curious about number 2, like it is a different shape than number 1. It's sort of more squat. And is there a reason for that?
Yeah.
It can't be sort of put longer and pushed into the.
Yeah, that's right. Let's see. Maybe that's a good one.
Yeah.
So I was, playing around, moving play pieces. And the other option is to move these 2 elements either along there or up here. But you then don't create any there isn't really a center for it. And so you have then some kids playing way on the far end and some kids playing way on the other far end. And it just felt like you'd end up with, if you go towards the parking lot there, it starts to feel a little bit back of house. And then if we go into that green pathway area, again, it starts to feel like it's tucked away and isn't a part of it. And so it just, it didn't feel like a space anymore. It kind of felt like a long edge, which is why I opted for to bring them a bit closer together.
If I may add, Councilor Nottingham, that's more like the origination.
Yeah.
For the current location.
This one here, yeah,
Yes.
that's what I thought, yeah. And the other one is.
The other one, we stretched it out so that it is less impactful.
Question about it, in the staff report, it shows that there might be an easement for option 2 that we have to consider to that building. Have we explored that? Do we know what the implications are?
I defer to me, obviously, through there. I've checked in with legislative services as well as development services, and it's designated park. So according to those departments, we get to go.
So there's no obligation to the building.
No.
Okay. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any more questions. I'm going to thank you for your presentation again, and I'm going to open the floor for comments. Comments? Councilor Stratton.
I'm still preferring option 2. I think Option two for me preserves the Great Lawn, and as the population increases, I think we need the area. Again, like Councilor Nightingale says, I don't want to see it become a playground. And I think option two, it can probably be refigured a bit more. The length of option one isn't equal to the length of option two, so to spread it out a bit more, I can't see that it'd be much of an issue, so. My preference for myself would be option two, and I've heard a lot from the community that the Great Lawn is a prize for the community, and I'd like to see it stay that way. Thank you.
My thoughts then are that option two is very close to that building, and that you're gonna have kids playing right under people's porches and bedrooms. And we are going to create conflict with those residents. I feel that we're gonna get complaints definitely from those residents that we placed that right under their door and their bedrooms. I feel like option one provides more opportunity for the future. I feel like we still have a ton of great lawn there that only gets used as a gathering spot, and I want to preserve it as a gathering spot a couple times a year max. I feel like option two is kind of crammed in there, and it's going to be more congested in the playground, as said, as spelled out in the report. And I think it's an amazing asset for our kids, and putting it down on that end will just bring life to the great lawn. It's a great lawn because it has life, not because there's a few people over there and a few people over there. I think what's great about it is we bring all these things together. You got the spray park up there where kids run around. You got this over here. I think that it ties it all together and enriches it rather than takes away from the great lawn experience. I think there's still lots of places a person can go and sit quietly most hours of the day. So I am in strong support of option one. I think option two does have some good value to it. I just really don't like the way it's parked underneath that building, and I feel like it doesn't work for us into the future, as well as option one. What else? Go ahead.
To echo Mayor Richmond's comments, preserving I think, we definitely want to preserve the Great Lawn to the extent that we can, because it is currently, that is our, our one spot, or one of the few spots in the community that is outdoor and green, where, it's open and conceivably we can fit many people. At the same time, the space is used on a daily basis for other activities, and I do feel that option two, it feels a bit squished, and I do have concerns that rightly or wrongly it will create some more conflict it will create conflict with residents in the building that's adjacent, and I do think that's worth consideration as well, because that might impact also children's use of that playground, and if it is something that is highly used, could it end up being underutilized because of that?
Anything else?
I don't think I have too much new to offer. I think we've gone around and around on this quite a bit. I think, as I mentioned, as a council, we have to weigh out what we hear from the community. What I hear from the community is preserving the Great Lawn space. So that, in addition to the safety concerns, I have to say that, I appreciate all of the comments. I really do, and the enormous amount of work that's gone into it. My choice of option two is not because I don't think that what you're saying makes sense, because it does absolutely. And I think for me, I have to weigh out these other pieces, and that's where I land.
Yes, I would echo that. What I've loved about the presentation is the whole idea of me viewing it as a room. that's such an interesting thing for me to actually view that space as a room. And I think that's exactly what we need to do. And so I'm all for creating more of a room-like space there. But I do feel that in terms of what value in sort of intangible value that Great Lawn has now and in the future, I think leaving it in adding trees and screens and that sort of thing and hemming it in like a room is really important. But I think leaving it as it is right now as a Great Lawn for gathering is really an important for this community as it moves ahead. And I feel that just by the shapes of these, that because this one is actually long, potentially there could be a little bit of wiggle room, making this longer in option 2 a bit longer. So I'm for preserving the Great Lawn and creating it more like a room with trees and such.
So you're for option 1.
I
I mean, option 2, sorry.
2, I'm correct.
Because I'm for option 1 and preserving the Great Lawn, so it's not a,
2.
I'm just clarifying this.
Yeah.
As opposed to I'm for preserve.
Option 2.
Well, I don't want to.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, and I realize I'm kind of, there's pros and cons to both sides. One thing I will also say, I'm just thinking about in terms of option 2, which is also great, is looking at the visual that you have provided the map. That there's that green space along the side that is designated as park, and it does. With option 1, it almost, I mean, that it's just kind of, it doesn't seem to be necessarily, I don't know how well utilized it would be versus option 2, we're actually reusing it, I think, in a bit, we're using that space more. So.
Can I ask a question here? Can you like close to how close the edge of the playground is to the building in option 2?
To the hedge, it's drawn at 2.5 meters.
So it's 8 feet, approximately 8 feet. The edge of the park is 8 feet from the hedge in the building.
And I do recognize that it will have some impact on the residents there, although I will say that the screaming and screeching, and I love kids, that comes from the spray park. It will come from the spray park when the cold water is dropped on kids, not from walking on logs, to be honest. But they do have quite high cedar hedges there already along their property as screens. That, because I walked out there yesterday and they're probably about 8 feet tall along there. And I would say that we've talked a lot about safety with, safety. And I feel that should also be a #1 priority, right? Safety of the kids. And that one is clearly more safe.
Okay, there's no more comments. I'm looking for a motion.
I'll move option 2.
Have a seconder?
Recommend to council.
Recommend to council.
Recommend to council option 2, I'm sorry.
Did I see a second? Councillor Helmer, further discussion? So as discussion, I will not be supporting this motion. I feel like we are asking for trouble, that this is going to cause way more conflict than we recognize. There is a hedge there, but that doesn't protect the 3 stories above that are right over top of it. I think that safety can be mitigated with the hedging that was suggested by contractors. So I won't be supporting this motion. Any further discussion? Go ahead.
I think I'm gonna have to echo Mayor Richmond on this. It's difficult, but I think if I land on one side, it's gonna be with Mayor Richmond on this.
Any further discussion? Call the question. Any opposed?
Like that noted.
Please. Motion carries. Thank you for the added work and the clarity. Much appreciated and for being here today. Moment here.
That's-
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
No.
Thank you. Good job. Yeah. Okay, we're on to 4.2, community wildfire resilience draft plan presentation. Did we get all of it?
Frankly, I'm gonna do the presentation, but we're here for Alice Parks and.
Thank you.
You need that much support, Clint?
Oh, yeah, it must be pretty controversial, whatever you're about to say.
Are we just full screening? Sharing? Okay, perfect. It should just be. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for having me. Same as the last group, first committee of the whole meeting, so this is all new to me, but exciting to be here. So as mentioned, I'll be presenting ideas from the draft community wildfire resiliency plan that was developed for Pemberton over the last year or so. My name is Quentin Schmidt. I'm a forest technician with BA Blackwell and Associates, and I worked on this with a handful of people, but largely my colleague Deborah Zemanek, who couldn't make it today, but she's the signing forester for the project. And the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan will largely be referenced as the CWRP throughout this presentation. It's the only acronym I'll try to use, so we won't get too mixed up. Quick agenda. In cramming a 100-page document into 20 minutes or so. I'll give a bit of background introduction on the plan itself and shed some light on how it was developed. And then some considerations for how recommendations from the plan might be implemented in the future. We'll cover the plan area that was assessed and looked at. We'll look at some fire history in the Pemberton Valley and why this plan is relevant. We'll look at fire threat both from a provincial lens and then a more localized lens. And then the bulk of the CWRP and the bulk of the presentation will be on a set of recommendations that are being shared with the village to increase their wildfire resiliency. So quick introduction on the CWRP itself. It's a very high level strategic planning document. One part of it assesses and updates the local wildfire threat to the village. And then the bulk of the plan lays out an action plan for the village to increase their wildfire resiliency. The ideas in the plan will help support funding applications for different fire smart initiatives and things such as fuel treatments. And the plan itself aims to be updated every 5 to 7 years based on change in the community. So maybe there's changes in the forest that need to be considered or growth in the community that needs to be considered. For those unaware, there was originally a community wildfire protection plan done in 2005 for the village. It was then updated in 2016. And this current plan is now named a community wildfire resiliency plan, but echoes many of the same sentiments. A quick look at how the plan was developed. Very in-depth background research on pre-existing plans and bylaws and legislation and conditions around the community. We worked hand in hand with a bunch of great people, both village staff and BC Wildfire and Community Forest and Lowot Nation and collaborated and came up with a bunch of ideas. We performed our own field assessments of the surrounding area. All this information came together, put together a draft plan that was shared with the internal committee we've been working with, gained feedback from everybody, and then we've produced a still draft, but more finalized plan. In terms of implementing this plan, as mentioned, the plan will inform certain fire smart initiatives and different policy updates in the village. It'll inform potential fuel management prescriptions, and then the plan can be implemented and the different ideas and things that get implemented by the village can be an adaptive process and kind of a different toolbox that the village can see what's working well, what isn't working well, where are we having success, where are we having challenges, and use that to inform their efforts and future plans. As mentioned, collaboration is an extremely important piece because wildfire is not just going to start or stop at the village boundaries. Knowing this, the SLRD completed a CWRP just last year, and the BC Wildfire Service has been actively involved with the Lilwat Nation and different prescribed fire and fuel management projects. Now having the community forest around the village provides kind of this single unique land manager for the area, and the Pemberton Fire Smart Group through Pemberton Fire Rescue. It's been a great resource as well. So quick background on the area that was looked at for the plan. We looked at the wildland urban interface, it's called. So where the built out community meets the forest. And we looked at a 1 kilometer buffer from the most dense structure areas in town. This was about 1,200 hectares. And important thing to note, 52% of this is private land. So it's very important to be driving initiatives that reduce wildfire risk on private land. And again, with collaboration, the village is immediately adjacent to Lilwat Nation and the SLRD. Some census notes that are important for wildfire resilience, dealing with the growth of the community, knowing the population is constantly increasing and the number of dwellings have been increasing. It really brings about the importance for growing proactively in terms of wildfire resilience. Just a quick look at fire history. The valley's no stranger to wildfire. All these dots are individual ignition points and fire perimeters that have occurred throughout the valley. This graph provides data since the 1950s, and it does show that within village boundaries, 70% of the fire ignitions have been human caused, which goes hand in hand with some of the concerns that the wildfire service, they do have concerns with spring grass fires or fall grass fires potentially escaping. And they also do share concerns with multi-fire lightning events that occur, which have produced some of the biggest fires in the area. So looking at local fire threat from a provincial lens, in terms of the overall risk, Pemberton is, as it shows in the WUI Pemberton thing, Pemberton is rated with the highest wildfire risk. It's a risk class of 1, which is the highest ranking that's given in the province. And on a finer scale, the colored fill of the map, with red being extreme wildfire threat and orange being a high fire threat, you can see that a lot of the forest and grasslands surrounding the village are predominantly high and extreme threat. Looking at a more localized fire threat, informed by field assessments that were done. This is that 1 kilometer area surrounding the community and excludes private land. Roughly 14% of the area was rated as high or extreme threat, and another 33% was rated as a moderate threat. So looking at the action plan and the recommendations inside this plan, we've presented 42 different recommendations developed largely in collaboration with the committee we've been working with. Each of them has a priority and a rationale and different parties that might be involved, different metrics for success, etc. And these plans or the recommendations are all organized and rooted in the fire smart disciplines, which are education and looking at legislation, planning and development, opportunities for interagency cooperation, different cross-training and fire department, resource recommendations, and finally, vegetation management. We'll provide a brief overview of these recommendations. We won't go into each of them specifically, as don't have the time, but I'm happy to answer any questions and expand on any topics you may have. So the first 5 recommendations all deal with fire smart education, which the village is already doing a very good job of through the Fire Smart Group and the fire department and partnered with BC Wildfire Service. These recommendations specifically detail with continuing and expanding the available fire smart education for visitors, especially as it's such a highly visited area in the summer, and expanding fire smart education opportunities for residents. The next 8 recommendations all deal with legislation, development, and planning, and how these can be used as tools for the village to proactively grow in terms of growing in a sense that isn't increasing their wildfire risk. The first subset deals with different vegetation policies. It looks at the possibility of enacting a wildfire landscaping bylaw. One looks at identifying and mitigating wildfire risk in any parks or open spaces of new developments. For example, the Nequokma, the new Benchlands development is identified almost 50% of their built area as open park space. The next set of recommendations is focused on fire prevention and response policies and largely deals with enforcement of fire bans and campfire permitting throughout the village, and also looks at opportunities for different road and trail standards in new developments to make sure they can be used as useful tools for first responders. And the last set of legislation recommendations looks at certain fire smart policies that the village can work to enact and might be great timing as the OCP is undergoing a revamp right now. One of the more important recommendations of this report is to enact a wildfire development permit area to ensure that wildfire risks are being proactively considered as the community continues to grow. And then specifically assessing and mitigating fire hazards around any village-owned critical infrastructure pieces. The next 3 recommendations all deal with interagency cooperation, which goes hand in hand with the collaboration efforts, and continuing to engage with certain regional partners on different fire smart initiatives. This is just a subset of individuals that can be involved. It's the opportunity to provide fire smart services to Pemberton Meadows and Pemberton Fringe, as these are within the fire protection area of Pemberton Fire Rescue. And exploring the idea of allocating community forest revenue to different fire smart initiatives in the village. The next 3 recommendations deal with cross-training opportunities. This is both for Pemberton staff as well as emergency response staff. Looks at having incident command training given to emergency management personnel, and also looks at training for Pemberton Fire Rescue, which would be specific wildfire training for the fire department, and cross-training opportunities with the BC Wildfire Service, and allowing the Pemberton Fire Rescue to continue assisting with prescribed and cultural burning projects. The next 4 recommendations deal with PFR resources, potentially pre-planning certain water delivery systems to different interface neighborhoods, and also conducting a water supply analysis to gain a good understanding of water that's available through the municipal system for suppression. And also working with the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District to procure a water tender to assist moving water outside of village boundaries where fire hydrants don't currently exist. And then also looking at replacing Pemberton Fire Rescue apparatus in the fire hall, as there have been concerns that the growth of the village and some of the older equipment they have is largely outdated. Next 3 recommendations deal with emergency planning potentials. First is to pre-plan neighborhood evacuation in the event specific to a wildfire for different areas around Pemberton. Looking into investing in backup generators for all village-owned critical infrastructure. And largely due to funding requirements and changes in the village, updating this CWRP. And the last set of recommendations has to deal with vegetation management itself, looking at fuel treatments first. First would be treating already prescribed areas, which there are a couple around town that already have fuel management prescriptions designed and are shovel ready, if you will. Second would be to develop new fuel management prescriptions for hazardous forest areas that we've identified. Third would be to explore alternative debris disposal methods as the traditional way of, or the easiest way of disposing debris often is pile and burning. Just a quick overview map of some fuel treatments that have been proposed. I know it's a zoomed out map. The next slide will zoom in. They're all the pink units in this map. And then any orange and yellow units are fuel treatments currently being managed by the Ministry of Forests. Just to zoom in on some of those fuel treatment units we've proposed, on the left map, it shows the Naquak unit, which is just outside the new proposed development. The park one looks at little forested municipal parks. The signal expands on a pre-existing fuel treatment and ties into the transmission line, and MAC is downslope of the Mackenzie Forest Service Road. And lastly, recommendations deal with residential fire smart, which the village is already doing a very good job with, but can always expand on. So continuing to hire fire smart staff incrementally, continuing to support neighborhoods through the Fire Smart Canada neighborhood recognition program, and continuing to make Fire Smart home assessments available throughout the village. Through this, there's opportunities to continue incentivizing homeowners to mitigate risk on their properties and make it easier for them to do so. And recommending Fire Smart plants and landscaping. There is a provincial guide to this to different homeowners. And then finally sharing the progress of Fire Smart initiatives throughout the community. So with that, I know that's a very quick zoom through of a very long plan, but yeah, happy to chat about anything.
Thank you for that. Great presentation, your natural.
Appreciate it. About that.
Questions? Questions? Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, if you don't mind, part of your presentation suggested funding come from the community forest. What does that look like? Would it support, and what kind of dollars are we thinking, or is this just in the draft stage?
Very much in the draft stage. And so I don't know what a dollar figure might look like. But a lot of the fuel treatments, for example, that have been proposed are directly within the community forest. So there's oftentimes the fuel treatments that are done don't generate a lot of revenue, which because they're more concerned with removing smaller debris and whatnot, where you can't make a profit off of or something. But if the community forest is generating revenue through some of their other forest management opportunities, they might be able to allocate some of these funds into making the fuel treatments more feasible, as fuel treatments are oftentimes they can be prohibitively expensive, which is difficult. But if they can offset some of the costs of those projects that are within the community forest with some revenues from their more traditional forest harvesting and management, I think there's opportunities there. But in terms of specifics, I don't have a great answer for you right now.
I got a follow up. The other thing I was wondering about is, as we're doing this field treatment and clearing areas out, has there been any discussion about putting trails in such that vehicles will have access to it at a later date? So they're gonna do two things. It's gonna give the locals more area to walk through the bush, and we're gonna keep them in a certain area. But if we do have a wildfire, then equipment that the fire department and Fire Smart has, have actually got access.
Yeah, so I think putting those trails in as part of the fuel treatment would be a difficult thing. But absolutely, I think there's fantastic opportunities for expanding on some of the pre-existing trails in the valley, lots of which intersect these fuel treatments that we've proposed. And for example, with the new Benchlands development, they've already pre-identified a number of trails that they're going to be putting in. And I'm fully agree with you that I think those can be used as great access points for first responders. I've used them myself a handful of times. But they can also provide little fuel breaks. But and it's a specific recommendation that's given in the plan is to make sure these trails are developed to a certain standard, so a certain width based on a whole number of things. So I think there's opportunities there where when there's trails that will be established and have been pre-planned, proactively doing some fuel mitigation around those trails and making sure that the trail itself will be quality enough for first responder access. But in terms of fuel treatments themselves, bringing new trails in, it could be an option for sure, but it would definitely have to be looked at in collaboration with PVTA and whoever else. But hopefully that answers your
That's what I
question.
wanted to hear. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Cool.
Any questions? Any question for Chief Adams, with all the recommendations that are brought forth through this report? How do you feel about the department's ability to action them, and maybe some of them require resources that you put into this year's budget for us to look at?
Yeah, definitely. So in fact, a lot of these recommendations, we're actually currently in the middle of some of them as we speak. Fire Smart is actually collaborating that planting guideline along with our current Bear Smart planting guideline. And so recognizing what plants and vegetation we can plant that actually recognizes both sides. We actually have plans to start recognizing some water sources outside of our within our fire district and some outside of our fire district for water supplies. Trying to remember what other initiatives there are, but it's quite a few actually. As I read through the plan, we are in the middle of doing currently, but haven't completed, or we have plans to do within the next couple of years.
And budget ability as well.
Correct.
Awesome. Great news. There's no more questions. Thank you so much again for your presentation. Much appreciated. Can I get a motion to receive the report? Scott, second by Councillor Helmer, and opposed, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks again.
Takes us to number 5. There's no reports, so motion to adjourn committee of the whole, please. Councillor Helmer, second by Councillor Scott, and opposed, carries. Take a minute here.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna reopen the regular council meeting, and then look for a motion to go back in camera, please. Moved by Councillor Helmer, second by Councillor Ramsden. Any opposed, motion carries.
Now we need to wait for everybody to leave.